From a very early age, perhaps the age of 5 or 6, I knew that when I grew up, I should be a writer. Between the ages of about 17 and 24, I tried to abandon this idea, but I did so with the consciousness that I was outraging my true nature, and that sooner or later I would have to settle down and write books. I was the middle child of 3, but there was a gap of 5 years on either side, and I barely saw my father before I was 8. For this and other reasons, I was somewhat lonely, and I soon developed disagreeable mannerisms which made me unpopular throughout my school days. Me too. I had the lonely child's habit of making up stories and holding conversations with imaginary persons. And I think from the very start, my literary ambitions were mixed up with the feeling of being isolated and undervalued. I knew that I had a facility with words and a power of facing unpleasant facts, and I felt that this created a sort of private world in which I could get my own back for my failure in everyday life. Nevertheless, the volume of serious, i.e., seriously intended, writing, which I produced all through my childhood and boyhood, would not amount to a half-dozen pages. I wrote my first poem at the age of 4 or 5, my mother taking it down to dictation. I cannot remember anything about it, except it was about a tiger, and the tiger had chair-like teeth. A good enough phrase, but I fancy the poem was a plagiarism of Blake's Tiger, Tiger. At 11, when the War of 1914 through 18 broke out, I wrote a patriotic poem, which was printed in the local newspaper, and was another, 2 years later, on the death of Kitchener. From time to time, when I was a bit older, I wrote bad and usually unfinished nature poems in the Georgian style. I also attempted a short story, which was a ghastly failure. That was the total of the would-be serious work that I actually set down on paper during all those years. However, throughout this time I did, in a sense, engage in literary activities. To begin with, there was the made-to-order stuff which I produced quickly, easily, and without much pleasure to myself. Apart from schoolwork, I wrote vers d'occasion, semi-comic poems which I could turn out at what now seems to be an astonishing speed. At 14, I wrote a whole rhyming play in imitation of Aristophanes in about a week, and helped to edit a school magazines, both printed and in manuscript. These magazines were the most pitiful burlesque stuff that you could imagine, and I took far less trouble with them than I now would with the cheapest journalism. But side by side with all this, for 15 years or more, I was carrying out a literary exercise of quite a different kind. This was the making up of a continuous story about myself, a sort of diary existing only in the mind. I believe this is a common habit of children and adolescents. A very small child, I used to imagine that I was, say, Robin Hood, and picture myself as the hero of thrilling adventures, but quite soon my story ceased to be narcissistic in a crude way, and became more and more a mere description of what I was doing in the things I saw. For minutes at a time, this kind of thing would be running through my head. He pushed the door open and entered the room. A yellow beam of sunlight, filtering through the muslin curtains, slanted on the table, where a matchbox, half open, lay beside the ink pot. With his right hand in his pocket, he moved across to the window. Down in the street, a tortoise-shell cat was chasing a dead leaf, etc., etc. This habit continued until I was about 25, right through my non-literary years. Although I had to search, and did search, for the right words, I seemed to be making this descriptive effort almost against my will, under a kind of compulsion from outside. The story must, I suppose, have reflected the styles of the various writers I admired at different ages, but so far as I remember, it always had the same meticulous descriptive quality. When I was about 16, I suddenly discovered the joy of mere words, i.e. the sounds and associations of words, the lines from Paradise Lost. So he with difficulty and labor hard moved on, with difficulty and labor he, which do not now seem to be so very wonderful, sent shivers down my backbone, and the spelling he for he was an added pleasure. As for the need to describe things, I knew all about it already, so it was clear what kind of books I wanted to write, insofar that I could be said to want to write books at that time.